And so it is my great pleasure to introduce Mr. Pityana as the co-founder of Save SA. He has had plenty to say about what's going on in South Africa, a brave man, an intelligent man, and one who I certainly look forward to hearing this morning. So.
Well, thank you very much. It's a great honor to be here, and I really appreciate the privilege of being invited. And I'm sure you weren't short of options of who to invite and have address you. It's a particular honor to be welcomed by Simon Gear, who is somebody, by the way, who I see on television and always look forward to rubbing shoulders with. You know, some of us like rubbing shoulders with popular figures that you see on television. So I'm very pleased that I'm at his table. Of course, Professor Adam Habib, I'm very pleased to be here. I've been watching with great admiration your thought leadership, not just of Wits University, but of society at large. Any student who goes through this institution under your principalship has a lot to gain, not only because you're the principal of this institution, but you're a thought leader for this society generally. Well, President of Convocation, distinguished guests, alumni, ladies and gentlemen, particular congratulations and welcome to the class of 1977 who are invited to this Founders Tea for the first time. It's important, and I think I must thank you for remembering Wits for what it represented in your own personal development and remembering the foundation role that it played in your own growth and development. But of course, like many, we always like to remember those who have had a positive influence and occupied very prestigious leadership roles in society and claim them as Wits graduates. And we shun and often disown those that have been ashamed and have not done so well, and disassociate with them, and rightly so sometimes, because they blemish the name of an institution that you think shaped and did what it could to make you what you are today. Your pride in this institution is a very well-placed affirmation of where this institution comes from and its own contribution and role in society. I would like to use this opportunity, though. By the way, I don't have a speech. I often speak and somebody asks me to give them my speech. I don't have one. I have reflections. And my reflections are on leadership. And I think it's appropriate to do so at this point in time in our society, to think about what kind of leadership is required as we face the kinds of challenges that we are confronted with as a country. And I'm glad to do this at a university, because I think a university is an appropriate place to do that reflection. It is a place of pioneering ideas that shape society, equipping young leaders with young minds, with new perspectives and ideas. Indeed, I look at universities in a different way than some people do. I don't think that it is one of the value chains in a production line of people who must just conform with what society is about. I think that this is a place that should produce a generation of people capable of bringing new ideas and be challenged and have them defend those ideas. So university is a place that is a battleground of new ideas and new innovations. And I'm very pleased that the Vice Chancellor indicated some of the interesting things that are being done here. It is a place where, as a last-born in my family, I can say this. It is a place where you can afford to get things wrong and proceed with courage to generate more ideas and have them contested in society. So I think that the challenge we face is that we need today in South Africa honest, credible, ethical, pioneering, and innovative leadership that is courageous. And the class of 1977 would be proud to remember some amongst them who did exactly that. One of them we have the pleasure of having as the principal of our university, and that's Max Price, who was the president of the SRC in 1977. The other, I must tell you, is somebody that some of you might not remember, and that's Orat van Heerden, who, when I started as a Director General in the Department of Labor, was employed to assist us representing South Africa in the International Labour Organization and engaging on the future direction of our labor relations dispensation and what it is that we needed to do to address the many years of exploitation and marginalization of workers in our society. I could say more. One of the less cherished personality, and rightly so, is Craig Williamson, who was around during those days. He's the infamous plotter against the liberation movement. And so those of 1977 remember that when you graduated, it was the first year of the 1976 student uprising, Simon. The young leader in Steve Biko was murdered in 1977. It was a repressive period. White youth were conscripted into an army that was deployed to confront their fellow citizens in the townships and kill some of them. There was repression of free speech. Media and expression were thoroughly undermined. Wits was a white and privileged institution largely. Many young students, young activists, including myself, were detained, tried, some of them without trial, some were imprisoned for daring to fight the scourge of apartheid system. It is the year, by the way, when there was a clampdown, a second one, after the 1960s, on political organizations, and this was a generation of black consciousness organizations. This was the year when there was a clampdown on media, with a number of print media being banned for exposing apartheid's rot. We were a country and a people who, for all practical purposes, were not free. And I'm not just saying that black people were not free. I'm saying that all of us as citizens of this country were not free. Because even those among our white counterparts who thought differently couldn't express themselves. They couldn't join the march to articulate a different society. We were an exclusive society. Indeed, that generation that graduated here at the time would say so, that they were a privileged few. They were a fortunate group. But here is the most important thing to remember, though, is that we were a generation that dared to imagine, fought and realized a free South Africa. It's articulated in the country's constitution of today. And today we enjoy fundamental human rights because we dared to imagine that possible. We imagine the right to self-determination. We enjoy that today, even though it's threatened by those who think that our self-determination is better taken away and that they run the affairs of our nation. We are at a different place for all practical purposes from where we were in 1977. We are, by and large, and please underscore that, by and large, we are a free people. Even though that freedom doesn't go far enough. Even though that freedom sometimes feels somewhat threatened. And the biggest threat to that freedom is the fact that some who signed with us on the dotted line in the social contract that the Constitution became feel shortchanged. And those are the marginalized. They begin to question the credibility and the efficacy of the Constitution. The poor for all practical purposes, and I'm sure you'd attest to this, are having a raw deal. They continue to be marginalized. South Africa is probably more unequal today than it was in 1977. Inequalities are widening. The education system, to great shame to a new generation of leaders, is possibly in a worse place than it was in 1977. And I must tell you this, that as an exile in England, I was received, having been through school, at an institution of further education and training to do my A-levels. And during my stint there, I was asked to assist English kids with English grammar. Now, the irony of this was that I was telling everybody that I was in exile there because the system of education was so bad and terrible that I fought against it, and so many of us fought against it. And what they were communicating to me was that it wasn't so bad after all. But by all accounts, one of the biggest betrayal of the dream of equality in our new dispensation is the failure of the basic education system. Our health system, and indeed Max Price, whom I referred to earlier on, was one of the champions of a more progressive health system, primary health care, ensuring that health services are available to the most poor and vulnerable. Our health system is an assault on human dignity. It is a fundamental betrayal of the aspirations that are articulated in our Constitution. Were it not so, the life as a Esidimeni disgrace would never have happened. You can go across the spectrum and do as I do. Visit the rural areas where my father was born in Lusikisiki. There's hardly a difference from the time he died in 1975 to today in 2017. And ask me why the people who live there wouldn't think that there is freedom in this country. So our aspiration, as articulated in our Constitution for socio-economic emancipation, is a pipe dream for many. It's a promise that has not been honored. And we must ask ourselves, how can we, therefore, expect the poor to do as we do, embrace the Constitution and respect it? Because it is a piece of paper and a contract where they feel they may have signed in anticipation that the promise therein would be delivered, and every day they live a life of that promise being betrayed. And so when the poor object to corruption, which steals largely from them in the main, we deploy our intellect and remind them, oh, by the way, apartheid was corrupt too, as if to suggest that you can bear with corruption because it is not a phenomenon of a post-apartheid system. We constantly have to remind each other that, in fact, the vision of the Constitution was to turn our back on a system of apartheid that was inherently corrupt in order to construct one that was against corruption. We tell them that don't worry about fighting state capture and corruption because, after all, white monopoly capital is about that. State capture shouldn't be allowed, whether it's by white monopoly capital or by anybody else, because, after all, we fought hard to ensure our right to self-determination. And so, what does this mean for a society that is so fractious, for a society that is so divided? What does leadership mean? It is clear and it is beyond question that under these circumstances, we desperately need a leadership that is capable of pulling the country together We need a leadership that can pull us from the precipice. Many of us, and rightly so, are focused on the leadership contestation within the ANC. And it is right that we do that because ANC is going to be in power until 2019. But that's a short-term play. This country needs a reflection on leadership that is going to take us forward beyond 2019. But it is important to reflect on what kind of leader we deserve as a nation, because we've made too many mistakes so far with disastrous consequences. Whilst it is important who leads us, whilst it is important who the ANC decides as a leader, it is not as important on what the attributes of that person who's going to lead this country, certainly in that period up to 2019 and presumably beyond 2019, what those attributes look like. And I would say that we must avoid the disastrous era, and this is a warning I would send to the ANC, avoid the disastrous era of 2007, of personalities and reducing everything to individuals. Let me venture to say that this is the kind of leader that this country needs. We need a leader with integrity, a leader whose word we can go peacefully at night believing that it will be honored. We need a leader that we can trust with the coffers of the state. We need a leader who is a constitutionalist, because the Constitution is our vision of a new dispensation. We do not need a leader who speaks down on the Constitution and invokes their narrow ethnic proclivities. We need a leader who places the premium on building and developing an inclusive society. We need a non-racist. We do not need a leader who exploits our diversity and our racial divisions to divide us further. We do not need racists, nor do we need racial chauvinists. We need a leader that embraces the values in our Constitution. We need a leader whom the ANC we hope will produce in December, who will hold others accountable for their corrupt deeds, and must do so even if it is comrades within their own ranks who should go to jail. We need a leader who is capable of removing rogue people that have been appointed in positions of great responsibility in the state system, in institutions like South African Revenue Services, the police, the Hawks, the NPA, Treasury, and many other similar institutions that today have been hollowed out and disabled from being able to execute their responsibility. We need a leader capable of appointing credible and knowledgeable cabinet. We need a leader who will appreciate the premium we place on the independence of our judiciary and our Chapter 9 institutions. And so, this is why we need a courageous leader, somebody who's capable of saying that we have many people in government departments, in state-owned corporations, and other institutions of state who are either unqualified or unsuitable to be in those roles, and that the state can play its role in educating the young, in delivering good health care, in ensuring that we have a corruption-free society, unless we have people who are suitable and who are qualified regardless of where they come from politically. But we need a leader who can forge a new social compact. Because as a society that is fractious today, we need to ensure that we bring together all the social actors, all the stakeholders, to confront the difficult years ahead of us. whether it be labor, business, civil society, and other structures in society. We can do without a populist leader who's going to make false promises. And I hear among some of the candidates in the leadership race in the ANC, false promises for more jobs. And I can tell you that there are going to be more job losses in this country because the consequences of the misgovernance of Zuma and his clique are going to be with us for years to come. And this economy is going to lose and shed more jobs. I wish I could tell you something different. We need a leadership that is going to be able to engage with the young and say where it might be desirable to have free education. This country today, next year, and a few years to come, cannot afford free education. How do we ensure in those circumstances, we ensure that the poor indeed get through education so that they can enjoy the benefits of the freedom that we fought for? We need a leader who's going to be able to tell us indeed that the coffers of the state have been dried up, they've been emptied by the corrupt clique. Unless we're able to have a leader who's able to do these things, who's not going to seek to buy and carry favor from some who may have catapulted them to a leadership role, we are going to plunge this country into an even worse crisis. A promise for more jobs, a promise for more spending of money that we do not have is going to plunge this country to a deeper and deeper crisis. But a social contract is not sustainable if it is about inviting the poor to give more and more and more. A social contract that is sustainable is one where those of us who are privileged must show and be prepared to give a lot more. But that journey must also be about bringing back the huge amounts of money that was been siphoned off from our state coffers. And we have institutions that are capable of doing that. Whether it be in this country, money that is hidden away within the country, or money that is hidden away in various parts of the world. But the journey to recover our democracy, to retrace our steps, the journey to honor the vision of our Constitution must begin with a leader that has the right credentials to do so. We have a beautiful country. It is ours to mess up. We must all be vigilant and defend the gains of our democracy, and do so jealously. Thank you very much.